it was eerily quiet. And then my mind was kind of like, you know, the head in the fishbowl.
Then it takes me into the bathroom and says, this is how you brush your teeth. Brush, rinse, repeat. Brush, rinse, repeat. Brush, rinse, repeat.
But there were two girls, and it was like, you'll have to give us a ride. You can't tell us no. You can't refuse us. He'll let us in his car.
Thoughts were all alone in this empty void, you know, the head in the fishbowl.
This doesn't look right. They got close enough where he said he could see, you know, their eyes and how intelligent they seem. This doesn't look right. These gremlin-type creatures. This doesn't look right. No pupils, no iris, 3 fingers, 3 long fingers. And this is when the mental torture.
And then it was eerily quiet.
Oh, I gotta breathe, man. I can't seem to take it every single time.
Are you glad Luke's back?
I'm very glad that Luke is back. He's drinking his, he went to, tell him what you did today, Luke. You went out and bought a couple of new beers for yourself.
Well, you know, I was tired of paying $10 to $12 per 6-pack, so I noticed that Aldi had a bunch of knockoff beers. And so Adam and I are drinking Brogel right now.
Yeah.
Brogel pop.
It's got like a, like a ram or something on it, or or a deer or something like that.
It's pretty brutal. No, but it tastes just like Shiner. I mean, I like Shiner, so this is awesome. It was $6.
And what else did you get?
Some fancy French beer, some Stella Artois. No, it's just like Stella, but it's called Imperium.
Imperium.
And of course, it tastes just like it, dude. Like, so I'm going to Aldi from now on for all my beers. For all my
Aldi,
beer
for all your beer needs.
Yes.
We're not advertising for Aldi. Just want to put that
They're
out
not
there.
paying us. Just,
No, not yet.
Not yet.
They might
Not
be.
yet.
If we we might be the only people that have actually given an organic advertisement for Brogel. So,
There's got to be someone out there drinking Brogel right
but you
now.
know, you've got a conspiracy about that you think that these are the actual beers that they sell. They put them under the other names for a higher price.
Right. I mean, yeah, like they could sell the lower tier price beer. It's going to draw people in, want to buy it. It's the exact same beer, and then the people that are actually alcoholics going to the gas stations are like, "Oh, I need Shiner." So there you go.
It's serving everybody, all the alcoholics in the world, man. Alcoholics they all got to band together, right?
Yeah, dude.
Anyway, welcome to Conspirinormal, guys.
It's a conspiracy.
It is a conspiracy. Everything's a conspiracy. What's up, Rob?
What's up, man?
Oh, not too much. Doing good.
I have a
Well, I'm doing well.
cold. That's right. You're not doing good. You're doing well. I'm not doing well. I have a cold.
Yeah, so I can tell.
That's okay. I took a bunch of medicine and I'm drinking some wine. I don't recommend the combination. Probably dangerous.
Are you gonna pass out if we hear a thud right in the middle of the show?
That's my forehead connected to the microphone.
As Rob hits the keyboard.
Well, I mean, in your defense, it was like, 75 degrees yesterday, and then all of a sudden it turns to like below 30.
Well, that's Tennessee for you. If you wait a couple of days, the weather changes. Has either one of you guys seen on Netflix a show called Wormwood?
I think I didn't watch it, but I've scrolled past it.
No, but I drank absinthe one time.
Well,
I have too.
that is appropriate to the show. Yeah, that's. I never have. I've never had absinthe.
It's a cool buzz.
I've never had the green fairy. So
Well, I didn't get the real stuff,
See, I don't know. There's a couple of hippie friends of mine that lived in like this geodesic dome in the woods that made it.
Whoa.
And it was, it was warm and it tasted like an East seed and everything. And they say they did it all. I don't know.
And you weren't worried about being poisoned?
Well,
From a bunch of hippies living in a geodesic dome in the woods?
when you're in your early 20s, you can only worry about so much,
That's true. Well, if I die, see you guys later.
Yeah, I didn't wake up blind or anything.
Hey, that's
that's
a good
good.
mindset that you should never lose also.
That's good. It's very positive that you didn't wake up dead or blind.
Yeah.
So there you go. So I was watching this it's like a 6-part documentary. And what it is about is it's about Frank Olson. You guys might be familiar with Frank Olson. Familiar?
Not ringing a bell.
It's
Going
the
once,
Olsen
going
twins'
twice.
dad.
Right, yeah, that's what it is. It's the Olsen twins. Although that could be part of the conspiracy. We talked about him with Nick Redfern back in 2014, I think. God, it might have been all the way back then. He was a scientist employed by Fort Detrick in Maryland. And he was taken somewhere to a retreat with a couple of other doctors. He was a doctor himself. And one of those was Sidney Gottlieb, who actually spiked his drink with LSD. And about a week or so later, he goes flying out of a window from a hotel in New York City. Okay.
It's starting to ring a bell.
All right. So for the longest time, his family was told that it was a suicide, that he was so distraught over something that it caused him to commit suicide by jumping out this window. Later on in the 70s, when MK Ultra was revealed as part of kind of like the fallout from Watergate, the CIA kind of had to admit that they were doing it. The family was told that, they admitted that, yes, he was dosed from LSD, but it was still ruled a suicide because apparently he had a bad effect from the LSD that lingered for that week, and he ended up committing suicide by jumping out of a window. Well, fast forward to the 90s when his son, Eric Olson, and that's who the documentary is about. It's primarily about his son, Eric, and his kind of quest to figure out what happened to his father. It's very well done. I highly recommend the documentary. But in the 1990s, he disinterred his father because his mother had died to bury him next to his mother. Well, they did an autopsy because he always had this suspicion that something just was not right about either one of the stories, whether he committed suicide on his own or he committed suicide because the CIA gave him a spiked drink a week earlier of LSD. And it was determined through some forensic evidence that they believed that Frank Olson was pushed out the window, that it wasn't a suicide, that it seemed like he had been hit by a blunt object before he was actually thrown out of the window.
How many years later was this?
Okay, I believe it was a murder. 1951 was when he was killed. 1994 was when they disinterred the body. Okay. So his son has just been on this quest for the last 20 or so years to try to figure out who was responsible for his father's death. Well, there's some interesting twists and turns through the series, and I kind of won't give it away because it is rather interesting. Some things about biological warfare and what might have gone on in Korea. So he finds out in looking at a CIA, like a handbook from the 1950s, that that throwing people out of windows was apparently a very popular means of CIA assassination in the late 40s, early 50s.
Well, I mean, it's easy to make that look like a suicide.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Now, it's interesting. I was looking into a couple other things, and these are actually mentioned in the documentary, although kind of tangentially. The first person that actually was killed, well, actually, I don't think it was the first. I'll have to get on the dates here. But James Forrestal, the first Secretary of Defense. Okay, now he's very popular among UFO conspiracy theorists because they believe that Forrestal was killed because he was going to spill the beans on the whole UFO and alien presence. I don't think that. I think it was something else, personally. But he also was at the Naval Hospital in Washington, D.C., and he actually ended up going out the window.
Huh.
This was in 1949, right? And the second person was a guy named Lawrence Duggan, Duggan, who they actually mention in this documentary very, very briefly. So I had to look up who this guy was. But he apparently also committed suicide by jumping out a window from his New York City office.
Huh. So
interesting. So
Yeah,
he was later accused, I think posthumously, of, which means after death, of being a Soviet spy. So on December 20th, 1948, so he would have been the first person chronologically on our list to be thrown out of a window. Duggan fell to his death from his office at the this is Wikipedia, Institute of International Education, located on the 16th floor of a building in Midtown Manhattan. His body was discovered around 7 p.m. that evening. A few days later, the New York Police Department made public the result of its investigation, which included Mr. Duggan either accidentally fell or jumped, which in Frank Olson's case, they actually said that too. Both were in New York City, by the way. So it's interesting that there is that there's a tie-in there. Now it gets even more weird, because on October 20th, 1948, W. Marvin Smith, a U.S. Department of Justice attorney and notary with whom Alger Hiss had worked. Now, Alger Hiss was a member of the State Department. Lawrence Duggan was also a member of the State Department. Both of these guys were both accused of being Soviet spies. Alger Hiss was a famous case that basically started off the entire communist Red Scare of the late 40s into the early 50s, like McCarthyism and all that stuff.
right.
So Marvin Smith was found dead in the southwest stairwell of the then 7-story Justice Building. Just after Lawrence Duggan's death, the Associated Press reported. The widow of Marvin Smith, Justice Department employee who died in a 5-story plunge 2 months ago, expressed belief today that his death was simply an accident. She told a reporter she feels certain it was not a suicide and was not connected in any way with his appearance as a minor witness in congressional hearings. Smith's death had been recalled in some newspaper accounts of the death of Lawrence Duggan in New York City. On October 20th, Smith hurtled to his death down circular stairwell in the Justice Department. This was not a window, but he was thrown down the stairwell. That was also the opinion of justice officials. Smith, 53, was an attorney in the Solicitor General's office. Last summer, he figured in a minor way in the House Committee on Un-American Activities. So here's 3 guys thrown out of a window. Lawrence Duggan in 1948, James Forrestal in 1949, Frank Olson in 1951, and Marvin Smith, I guess that there wasn't a window available, so he got thrown down a stairwell. And the CIA, these declassified documents, I think they were declassified in the 70s or the 80s, these handbooks on how to commit assassinations. One of those was throw people out of a window and make it look like a suicide.
And these people were all connected.
Marvin Smith and Lawrence Duggan were connected.
Okay.
But I don't think they necessarily have to be connected to see that there's a common theme here that all these guys were either thrown down a stairwell or thrown out of a window. Right? They were not, this was just a common tactic that was used at the time. So apparently it was very popular to throw people out windows in the early 40s, in the late 40s and early 50s.
Huh. I still had one question about the when they interred the guy and determined that he had received some sort of blunt trauma prior to plummeting to his death.
Yeah, they
That
said
seems like that would be really hard to determine.
Yeah, what the forensic pathologist that looked at the body said, and of course I'm getting this from the documentary, and I'd heard this before, but what he had said was it looked like he had been hit in the front of the head, and it didn't look like it was something that would have happened breaking glass.
Right, but you're talking a guy that 40 years ago plummeted to his death.
Well, apparently they could still tell by the skull, how the skull looks.
But you don't know what he his fall to the ground was like. I guess that's like, you don't know what he encountered on his way to the earth and how he struck the ground.
I think too that there's other circumstances that say that.
I'm not by any means saying that this wasn't something nefarious. I'm just saying that piece of evidence to me is like it stuck out as. I'm just curious how they came to that conclusion.
Well, the Frank Olson thing stinks, and so the idea is, I'll just go ahead and say it. Spoiler alert. The idea is that what his son thinks happened. The LSD part is what has been focused on primarily with Frank Olson, that he was spiked with LSD and somehow that caused his death. His son thinks that, no, that's not what happened. That's just a distraction. He thinks that his father was going to spill the beans on what was going on at Fort Detrick in advances in biological warfare and the fact that they may have used biological warfare in Korea. Right. And he was going to spill the beans on that, and that's why he was eventually
maybe it's a combination of the two. They roped him into MK Ultra to. Well,
the LSD was to try to make him malleable so that he wouldn't do
that's
it.
what I'm saying. Yeah,
right. They
inducted him into that.
That was the first try. They'll convince him to say, "Don't do this," and if all else fails, well, we're going to have to kill him. So that's his son's theory on what happened to his father. And I think it fits in. And I think with, the Forrestal thing has always been suspicious too. Like I said, I think with the Forrestal stuff, people don't pay attention to that because Forrestal was in like a sanitarium. But apparently, and Peter Robbins actually has looked into a lot of this. I just kind of disagree with Peter as to why Forrestal was killed. I don't think it was UFOs. I think it was something having to do with the Cold War, some kind of form of guilt. He was going to spill the beans about something.
Yeah.
They got rid of him. So when these people are highly placed in this kind of national security state, you have to, if you don't want the secret to come out. Because if the secret had come out about biological warfare that we were using, while the communists had already been accusing us of doing it and we had been denying it, think about the implications of that in 1951, what that would have meant.
Oh, for sure. And so much of that stuff
not a
is
big deal now.
And it was all handled with non-disclosure agreements and stuff like you've got this security clearance, you got to take it seriously. It doesn't matter what you know or what you see or what you hear, you can't share it. And if someone starts to get shady, that's how they're going to react. That's how they have to react.
Yeah, and don't think that it doesn't, Chris Wolford told me, we were talking about this on Facebook, and he told me that he was surprised that documentary came out. And I said, well, the CIA or whoever would just try to spin it as like, well, we don't do that anymore. That was back then. We were fighting the Soviets. But they still do stuff like that. I mean, come on.
I'm sure that it's gone way deeper than that. Yeah, I mean,
right. So it's interesting. Just those patterns are there, and
they're not scared of us. They don't care what kind of documentaries come out.
Right. Yeah, they could care less, I guess.
No.
Luke, what do you think?
They couldn't care less. Is the appropriate phrase.
Thanks.
He's right, Adam. He's right.
Thanks, Mr. Grammar.
You're welcome. Don't mention it.
All right, guys. We're going to get our cigars lit, and we're going to talk to Timothy Renner tonight. We're going to go beyond the seventh gate on Conspirinormal. Okay. Back on Conspirinormal, guys. Rob and I, we have our cigars lit, and Luke has his Brogel
Yeah.
over here. Oh, yeah, dude. And we have Tim Renner on the line. And I had the pleasure in October of hanging out with Tim and his co-host for Strange Familiars, James, in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, which was a really awesome, good time. We got to investigate like a haunted bridge and learn about the what was it like we watched some video or something, these people talking about like some loaded waffles or something. I don't remember exactly what that was.
That's what they call it, Suicide Bridge. And
yeah,
we went to the bridge, and for the life of me, I can't figure out how anyone could have killed themselves on that bridge. They should call it like Broken Ankle Bridge.
Yeah. It's just totally not. It's completely just like it's
If
so
you put
short
some
to
weights
the.
on yourself and go head first, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I'm pretty sure I could have done a jump into that creek without much problem from the bridge.
Yeah. We were pretty close because I think that a couple of days later, I went to the Eisenhower National Site, and it was like right there.
Yeah, it's also known as Eisenhower Bridge, I think.
Okay. Yeah, because I saw it coming on the way back on the bus, because you can only take the bus from the Gettysburg Welcome Center, take the bus to the Eisenhower, and then back. They won't really let you drive over there. And I saw it, and I was like, oh, that's the bridge that we were at on Friday night. So
Did you catch that one photo I took that had that like weird glowing object in it?
No, I didn't see that. Was that night?
Yeah, from that night. It's just one single photo. There's a glowing object off to one side. And I recorded, I don't know how much audio, however long we were there. I had audio running the whole time, but I forgot to turn it off, and the files are too large. So I have the files, and I can't get them on my computer. My computer just doesn't like them because they're like 3-hour-long waves.
Oh, geez. Yeah, that was kind of an interesting night. It was really cool to hang out with you guys over there. How's James? Yeah. How's James doing?
He's doing good.
I haven't heard him on Strange Familiars a lot lately.
Well, we've been having Skype problems, and then just problems getting together, like our scheduling problems and stuff. He moved, and he's got a whole bunch of, a new girlfriend and all kinds of stuff going on in his personal life. So it's just hard to get together. But he was on the last Patron episode, and he's on the first part of the next episode we'll be doing. So
okay, cool. Yeah, that's kind of how it goes. The new girlfriends, they just kind of get in the way. So we're going to talk tonight about your book, Beyond the Seventh Gate. And this is your first book, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Because you've got the other book about Bigfoot in Pennsylvania that we talked about, and now your new book, which is West Coast Bigfoot. But
Bigfoot, West Coast Wildman.
Right. And, we're going kind of out of order here. But this book, as you kind of describe it, is a lot more you than probably like the other two. This is kind of like more of your own kind of research and interpretation.
Yeah, this is a lot more of my own writing in the book. Well, the whole book is my writing. But it's more of my research, and the Bigfoot books are both reprints of old newspaper articles for the most part. I have some commentary in there and some additional writing, but for the most part, they're old newspaper reprints. This book is all my writing based on my research, and I kind of consider it, it's my baby. It's my first book. It's there's more of me in it than the other two.
Yeah, and I have the luck of actually having a signed copy by the author himself.
They're very rare. You have to ask that guy. I'll find him.
I got it at some event called Albatwitch Day or something like that. So,
oh yeah.
Or as Soraya likes to say, Albatwitch.
Hand it to me, dude. I'll sell it on eBay.
I was hoping Albatwitch would come up tonight.
Yeah, the Albatwitch. There's a cool band by that name too, so I hear.
They're very noisy.
Very
angry.
Yes.
Very angry band.
Yes. Talk a lot about corporations and stuff.
Yeah, very political.
Let's I want to talk about this legend, because this is kind of like a local urban legend where you live in York County, Pennsylvania. And you kind of talk about, it's like 3 counties, Adams County, which is where Gettysburg is, right? And then York and Lancaster, which of course, is famous for the Amish and all that. And I actually got to drive through that whole entire area on my way to meet you that Friday. So what is this urban legend of the 7 Gates of Hell?
All right. Well, it comes in 2 parts. There's I heard when I first moved here, which was in the mid 1990s. And then there is the sort of post-internet legend. So the original legend, as I heard it when I moved here, simply said that there were 7 gates of hell. There were 2 different locations where it was named. One was Prospect Hill Cemetery in York City, and the other was in Hex Hollow, which is it's a place where the sort of famous, they call it the Hex murder, took place in York County. There's been a documentary about it called Hex Hollow. It's there's a local practice called powwow. It's a folk magic kind of faith healing tradition, and in the 1920s, a fellow got murdered because some other fellows thought he had placed a hex on them, and that area is called Hex Hollow. So these 7 gates of hell were supposed to be located either at this cemetery, the Prospect Hill Cemetery, or in Hex Hollow. Toad Road was a totally different legend when I first moved here. There was the 7 gates of hell were never associated with it. The way the 7 gates of hell were supposed to work were at either location, no matter where people said they were. It was just a series of gates, and it was a sort of a circuitous route. So there weren't physical gates necessarily, but each circuit you made, and you had to know the special route to go through either Hex Hollow or the cemetery. And each circuit you made would open a sort of virtual gate. And then as you went, things would get more horrible and more supernatural as you went along. So that's the legend as I originally heard it.
And why one would want to do this, I don't really understand.
Legend tripping,
Gotcha.
It's the old as soon as kids got cars and mobility and so forth, I think things like that became popular. Starting when people had more free time and more transportation and the ability to go to supposedly haunted locations. The post-internet, and I think I can literally pinpoint when this legend was applied to Toad Road. In the late 90s, early 2000s, there was an email group, if you guys remember those. You join up for email message groups.
Mm-hmm.
And it had to do with local legends and so forth. And there was a group of people that were members of this who had their own sort of like paranormal legend tripping group. And they were well-meaning, I think, but they never let the facts get in the way of a good story. So one day they announced they found Toad Road, and they found the legend. They found out the true legend of Toad Road. And they came out with this outrageous story on this email group about a insane asylum that burned down and all these people were killed. And it was their ghosts that were haunting Toad Road, and that accounted for all the horrible stuff. Now, let me take a step back and say the only thing that was ever said about Toad Road when I first moved here, the only thing I ever heard, and the first thing I do when I go anywhere is start digging for the ghost stories and the legends. The only thing I heard about Toad Road was, specifically I heard, was from my wife who went to day camp out in that area, right nearby. And she was told by one of the counselors or a fellow camper, I'm not sure which, they said, don't look behind you on Toad Road. It was just this very ominous statement, like, when you're on Toad Road, don't look behind you. But post-internet, this, you know, they come out with this story of this insane asylum burning down and so forth. And knowing the area, knowing the area, I looked at a map. My father-in-law does genealogy, and he has tons of local maps. So I looked at the map and went back to the 1700s, and there was never an insane asylum on Toad Road. They mark these buildings. They mark all kinds of buildings out there. Schools are marked. Hospitals are marked. You know, the only thing that was ever on Toad Road, as far as a structure, was what looks to be like, they call it a seasonal dwelling. It's probably a hunting lodge, or a hunting cabin rather, not a lodge.
Sure.
So I came back to them and I said, no way. There was never no insane asylum. Sorry. And then they came back almost immediately. I mean, like, you know, within hours, if not minutes, and said, oh, no, it wasn't an insane asylum. It was a mad doctor. There was a mad doctor who lived out there, and he kept patients in his house, and it was his house that burned down, and that was the result of the fire, and that killed all the patients, and et cetera, et cetera. So this, you know, at the time, I said, this sounds like nonsense, but whatever. I don't think so. Time goes by, and I get contacted by the Weird USA people, the people who put out the Weird USA book. And they wanted to use a story I'd written about Hex Hollow for the book. And I said, sure. And then they asked me to take pictures of that. And they said, can you take pictures of Toad Road also? I said, yeah, I can do that. But please let me proofread the story, because there's a lot of nonsense out there about Toad Road and these 7 gates of hell. Well, the book is published, and here are my pictures right next to this outlandish story. It looks like they copied and pasted right off the internet about this burning insane asylum.
Gotcha.
At that point, I resolved to someday I'm going to figure out as close as I can the true story of this, and I'm going to print it, and I'm going to make it right, because it just bugged me that my pictures were next to this complete nonsense story.
And this is not an unusual thing, like the whole 7 gates of hell, or the gates of hell thing. Like, a lot of towns actually have this kind of urban legend.
You'll find them even in Pennsylvania. I think there's 2 or 3 other towns that have them.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Do some of them involve kind of like the weird, like, cars acting strangely and...
Yeah. Some of them have actual gates. Some of them don't. You know, some of them are underground. They're in, you know, supposedly in tunnels and so forth. So, yeah, it's a popular thing. There was a traveling preacher, a very popular traveling preacher in the mid 20th century, who one of his sermons was about the 7 gates of hell. My guess is that somebody was inspired by that and decided to sort of see if they could make them a real place, you know, and then they kind of transferred over to these local legends.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So what did you do to start to try to like debunk this theory and kind of looking into the story a little bit? Like, what were kind of the steps that you took?
Well, I started looking at what people were reporting, first of all. So as far as the weird stuff that goes on out there, and none of it really sounded like ghost stuff to me. They're reporting screams in the woods. They're reporting things peeking at them from behind trees. They're reporting being paced in the woods by things just out of sight. None of this is particularly ghost-like behavior. And if you know anything about cryptid creatures, Bigfoot, this sounds a lot like what's reported with them. So immediately I kind of went, well, this looks like maybe not a ghost thing, but let me see what I can find.
Mm-hmm.
So I started looking and seeing how did these legends stick? Because sometimes legends will stick if there's a little bit of truth. And one of the most unfortunate things about this is there was a doctor who lived out near Toad Road. His name was Dr. Belknap. And because people wanted to, I mean, they really, really wanted this insane asylum story to stick. So they started looking for any doctors that lived in the area. And sure enough, Dr. Belknap lived in the area. So he became the mad doctor. Now, he was a cardiologist. He never worked with mental patients. He did work at a place called a sanitarium, which for some people go, aha, see, he worked in an insane. No, he did not. Hospitals of various sorts, any place of medical rest in the early 20th century was known as a sanitarium.
See, that's actually something I didn't know until I read that in your book. Because you normally make the association of a sanitarium with like a mental institution.
Yeah, and nowadays it would be. But at that time, you know, like I said, early, mid 20th century, a sanitarium was any place of medical rest.
Okay.
So, and now it could be an insane asylum, but it didn't have to be. And in fact, the Senate, he's worked at the West Side Sanitarium, which was just a hospital in York. Before York Hospital, that was the hospital in York. There was no freestanding insane asylum in York County. There never has been. They went to the almshouse before, and once York Hospital was built, there's a floor or a wing, I forget which, in York Hospital where people with mental problems are sent. So York County's never had a freestanding insane asylum. So this doctor, you know, people in these different ghost story books named him. They basically called him out as the doctor. They said he had a hospital, a sanitarium or something he was running far up in the hills in Helm, which, by the way, would place it far off of Toad Road, so that makes no sense at all. Toad Road runs through a sort of a riparian valley alongside a creek, so it's not up in the hills. It's in a hollow. They made up all sorts of horrible things about him to associate him with this story, and it's simply not true. Dr. Belknap was a veteran of both World Wars. He did a lot of charity work for the poor and the aged. So he wasn't this kind of sinister figure that was holding patients hostage in his home or whatever the reports were.
Right.
As of the printing of the book, now I haven't checked lately, but as of the printing of the book, his second wife was still alive. And I thought, man, that's horrible. Like I hope she never read my book. I hope she never heard any of the stories about her husband. But if she heard any of them, I hope it was from my book, because the other ones are just horrible. It's like, and nobody did the research. They're just printing rumors. Yeah. And so if I did one good thing with the book, hopefully I cleared Dr. Belknap's name, because he doesn't need to be associated with that.
Yeah. It seems like that's a common motif of some of these urban legends too, is like the mad doctor, you know, like the whole melon heads thing in Ohio, where they talk about like the melon heads were produced by some mad doctor doing experiments out in the woods. Like that's always an association with it too.
I was actually, some people from Ohio reached out to me after reading my book, and they're like, can you come here and do the same thing? Because they wanted me to kind of start debunking that stuff. But maybe someday I'll get there. But
the Hex Hollow stuff too figures into this. This is all part of this, like this motif here.
Well, like I said, that's where one of the two places where the Seven Gates were originally supposed to have been located.
What happened there? Like, and what happened there? What is said to have happened? What really happened? And like, you've been to these places, so what is actually there?
What is there now is a very awesome park called Spring Valley Park that takes up most of the valley, and what they call the Hex House, the house where the murder occurred, is still standing. It's not part of the park. It's private property. But it abuts the park, basically. It's right there. The the story, so there was a man named Nelson Raymeyer. He was a healer. Like I said, he did this local practice, which is called powwow. It's a folk magic tradition. And he was also a socialist. He lived alone down there in that house. His own wife said she wouldn't live with him because he was, in her words, is one of my favorite quotes about the man. He was, quote, too damn peculiar. So she would not live with him. But again, this wasn't a bad guy. This is a guy who helped his neighbors. He employed his neighbors on his farm. I found references to him running for school board and so forth in the area. He cared about people's education. And, by all accounts, he was a good man. There's this other fellow, this Blymeyer fellow, who was a failed powwow doctor. He kind of lives this sort of sad life where he can't get anything going. He wants to be. So there were storefront powwow practices in New York. This is in the 1920s at this time. I think this guy probably wanted to be a powwow doctor and could never get it going. He couldn't keep any of his patients. He's got this hard luck story, and he decides at some point that he's been hexed. Now, the sort of danger of practicing this folk magic tradition is you can also be very easily accused of being a witch, because the sort of thought process goes, well, if you know how to heal, you also know how to hurt with magic. So he starts visiting these various other powwow doctors, including one known as the River Witch of Marietta. She's right across the river. Actually, where you were Albatwitch Day, she would have been like just maybe 3 miles north of there. There's another little river town.
Okay. Okay.
And after he visits her a number of times, supposedly she said, "Give me $1." He handed her $1. She folded it up and said, "Unfold this and you'll see the face of the person who put the hex on you." He unfolds the dollar bill and supposedly sees the face of Nelson Raymeyer. So he decides he's got, he asked her how to break the curse. She says you have to get either his hex book or a lock of his hair and bury it 6 feet underground. So he decides that, he's got to do this. And he's kind of, my feeling is he's probably too afraid to do it by himself. So he starts looking around York and he finds another kind of hard luck case, a younger guy who was had a bad home life. He was abused by his stepfather. He worked in the same cigar factory as Blymeyer in York. And he convinces this kid that he's been hexed too, and he's been hexed by Raymeyer. They continue to look around. They find another family with a farm near Raymeyer's, and they're having hard times. Their cows aren't giving milk and so forth. And basically he convinces them they've been hexed by Raymeyer's as well. So their son and the other boy and Blymeyer, the three of them, it's Curry, Hess, and Blymeyer, they make their way down to Raymeyer's house one night, and Raymeyer lets them in and talks to him all night, lets them stay the night because it got late, feeds them breakfast in the morning, and sends them on their way. The next night, they come back. He lets them in again, and they basically attack him. And they ended up, apparently Raymeyer gave a pretty good fight. He was supposedly a really big, strong man, over 6 feet, and pretty imposing guy. But eventually, after a protracted fight, they ended up beating him to death with a block of wood and a chair. And to cover to try to cover the crime, they tried to light the place on fire. Well, they couldn't even do that right. I think they burned. There's a burn mark on the floor, I think, but they didn't burn the house down.
Yeah, the house is still there, right?
Yeah. Supposedly, as they're leaving, as they killed the man, when Raymeyer gave his death rattle, supposedly Blymeyer said, "Thank God the witch is dead." And supposedly, as he was leaving, he turned around and from the flames supposedly saw Raymeyer's spirit like come out of the house and take to the sky. So the story goes, but the body, Raymar's body, was found a couple days later by his neighbor, and big murder trial ensued. They actually called it the trial of the century in 1928. This is, however many years before OJ.
Right. To ask you something so associated with this that you mentioned in that chapter that I'd never heard of before, a book called The Long Lost Friend.
Yeah.
What is that?
Well, that is the sort of the sort of recipe book for this powwow tradition, the main one, the most popular one. It's written by a man named John Homan, and he brought these different little spells and prayers and incantations and so forth. It's all folk magic. It's a lot of stuff like if you have a stomach ache, you tie a string around an egg or something, and you cook that egg and then take the string off, and it's very simple sort of folk magic things. The recipes for like writing Himmelsbriefs, which are basically letters from heaven, which are little prayers you would write and keep with you, like to keep you safe from hunters or being shot from bullets or from rabid dogs and so forth. Things about how to put out fires and the like. So just very simple little prayers and spells, but the whole book is full of them. The guy brought them from Germany. He gets a lot of them from I'm drawing a blank on it now. Egyptian Secrets is the name of a book published before his.
Huh. Egyptian Secrets.
They were brought from Germany, but for some reason his book, Long Lost Friend, became sort of the most popular book on powwowing, and that was supposedly the book they were looking for. That they never had the guts to actually look for it. After they killed the man, they still couldn't get up the nerve to go in his basement and look for his hex book.
Yeah, sounds like the whole thing was just botched. Yeah,
and there's a theory that it had more to do with trying to rob him than really trying to break any hex.
Do you have a copy of that book?
I have several copies of The Long Lost Friend.
Wow.
Dating back to, it's been in print. It's since 1860 something. So there's multiple copies out there. I kind of collect editions, so I have several editions.
Huh. Do you use any of that stuff yourself?
This is asking if I practice folk magic. Yes, I do. Yeah, I mean, folk magic is. Boy, this is a whole different topic.
Yeah.
But in my view, folk magic is like folk tales, and I'll say like folk tales are kind of the mythology of the people. They don't often have to do with gods. They have to do with, but they still teach lessons, and they usually have to do with spirits or some sort of lesson or some sort of information you're passing down, but not to do with gods. So I often say, myths are sort of, they belong to the priests, while folklore belongs to the people. And I think folk magic is the same way in regards to other kinds of occultism. Like other occultism is just a sort of religious based, even if it isn't a standard religion. It sort of belongs to the priests, while folk magic belongs to the people. It was practiced at home.
Right, and this is kind of like a the hex magic, that tradition. I guess ultimately from Germany.
Yeah, and
the Pennsylvania Dutch.
Yeah, it comes from Germany, and there's a fantastic book called Trolldom, which is folk magic from more the Nordic countries, which is I'm particularly fond of.
Huh. Very interesting. Next time I'm up there, I'm going to have to see this book.
Yeah.
Our
I
books.
find them all the time. I'm constantly going to auctions and stuff, and whenever I find a new edition, I'll pick it up.
Wow. I guess this is just something that's from Is it just specific to that area, or is it?
I found that just through talking to people, long lost friends popular kind of throughout Appalachia, as well as Pennsylvania. It's it's sort of home base is Pennsylvania, but it's really found a good bit of popularity throughout Appalachia.
So this could be around here in Tennessee as well.
I think it really could.
Okay. Also, you go to Prospect Hill Cemetery, and there's some interesting stories about it as well.
Well, oddly, I mean, considering that most cemeteries, especially the size of Prospect Hill, will have multiple stories, I could only find one ghost story in regards to that whole cemetery, and that has to do with the singing corpse, which was a really cool story about people were seeing this pale-faced man with glowing red eyes who was singing "Nearer My God to Thee" there at midnight, I believe. In the cemetery, he'd just show up.
Yeah, that's a crazy story. That's like from the early 1900s that they said that this happened.
Yeah.
So no one else has seen that since then, or seen anything similar?
I mean, you can't go in that cemetery at night without getting arrested. It's not in a particularly great neighborhood of York.
Gotcha.
I've been out there at night, and I've seen no glowing red eyes nor heard any hymns being sung, but I can't say that no one else ever has.
Okay. Toad Road itself. Now, you've done plenty of walkabouts in there.
Yeah, I love that place.
So, I mean, what are some of the stories from there and like the sightings that you've seen, things that you've seen in that area?
Well, as I said, that what sounded to me like cryptid things. The screaming and the people were reporting. He says screaming and things peeking from behind trees and things walking there. So that's what I started looking into, and I started digging, and I indeed found someone who said they were attacked out there. Since writing the book, I've been in contact with this fellow. And the newspaper article was very brief. It was from, I think, 1974. And it said he was attacked by a green-haired monster. Excuse me. Out on Toad Road. And sent to the hospital with face scratches. Now, I tracked the guy down. He had no internet presence. He was really, really hard to find. It took me a long, long time to find him. And I contacted him, and I said, I'd like to talk to you about this, this event that happened in 1974. And he called me and he said, wow, I haven't thought about that in years. Let me think about it. So over the course of about 6 months, I drew this guy out with this story. And what happened, and this is not unusual, the police report was not what happened. I found this with other Bigfoot reports in the area. Excuse me. For instance, there's a Bigfoot report where someone hit it with a car in the area, and the police reported them as hitting a cow, and the witness said, no way, no how did I hit a cow, but the police just put down, he hit a cow.
Huh.
And in fact, a hair sample was sent from it left hair on the bumper of his car, and hair sample was sent and analyzed and came back as unknown primate. So the cow was apparently an unknown primate. So the police, I think probably to make their paperwork easier, maybe it's not a deeper conspiracy than that. Although I have filed FOIA requests for these police reports and multiple police reports from the Toad Road area, and none of them have ever been answered. I do not have a lawyer to pursue that matter any further. So the only thing I can say, if they won't answer the FOIA requests, there's nothing I can do. I can't make the police, give me the reports.
So where they said that it was an unknown primate, that's what this gentleman that had this experience told you?
Well, I was using that as an example to how the police sort of simplify the report. So the report the police gave the newspaper is that he was sent to the hospital with scratches on his face. He was sent to the hospital with a brain injury. He was in the hospital for over a week. He said what happened was he drove his car out there. He was just looking for something to do. He was with a friend. The car would not start. This happens in many paranormal accounts, Bigfoot, UFOs, you name it. Couldn't get the car started. Something started messing with the car. Trying the door handles, banging on the side of the car, et cetera, et cetera. They stayed for hours afraid in this car. He said it started getting too late. He said, I had to make a move. I couldn't stay there all night. He gets out of the car and starts trying to find, this is before cell phones, et cetera. So he's trying to find help, going to, see if there's a nearby house or something. And in his words, he didn't ever use the word Bigfoot. He said he ran into a monster, a huge, hairy monster that was standing on two legs. And in his words, this thing beat him down. Like he literally ran into it in the dark, like bumped into it, and it beat him down and gave him a brain injury, sent him to the hospital. He has nightmares on the regular about it. He said he really, his girlfriend hated when he talked to me about it because he said he'd have nightmares. He'd wake up screaming for 2 weeks afterward. This guy has, I'm not a psychologist, but from my point, it looks like he has serious post-traumatic stress about this.
Right. And talking about it just kind of brings it all back up again.
Yeah. And you can tell, he shakes when he talks about it. And I probably shouldn't have said this. It was Sarai, actually. Sarai told me, you asked him a leading question when you asked him that. Because when he said he ran into a hairy monster, I said, do you think it was Bigfoot? And he was so not a Bigfoot guy. He paused, he got real quiet, and he said, I never thought about that. I guess it could have been. So he wasn't a Bigfoot guy at all.
Yeah.
He was never a Bigfoot guy.
Did he give any other kind of description about it?
Just that it was tall, it was hairy, and it was bigger than any man he'd ever seen. And it was standing on two legs. And the police told him, well, it was a guy in skins. You ran into a guy wearing skins. He said, this was so maybe if it was the biggest man who ever lived in skins, he said, but no, it's, and then the police told him too. He's like, well, it was a cow. And this guy lived on a farm. He said, I lived on a farm. We had cows. I know what cows are. I didn't run into a cow. So, he spent a week in the hospital. He had long-term problems. He had a serious brain injury. He said when he went back he was 17 or 18 at the time. He said when he went back to school, he had to have someone walk him around from class to class. He couldn't even remember where his classrooms were.
Wow.
So he had a serious injury out there. So I found this guy. I found another report. Again, this is after the book was published. Another person was parked in the same exact place this guy was. And because they had heard all these ghost legends, they chalked this up to ghost. They said something lifted up the back end of their car.
Huh.
Now, ghosts do not lift up the back end of cars.
Right.
And they could feel it. They lifted up and dropped their car. And they never saw anything. So a friend of mine, actually James' father, saw something that he described as huge and green and hairy back there, which when the green thing kind of freaked me out a little bit. Because I was like, all right, now we're talking about green monsters, really?
It's but when swamp things back there or something.
Yeah, exactly. But when you start digging into Bigfoot literature, there are quite a few cases out there where people report either a green tinge or there's moss or algae or something growing in the hair, a sloth can get that, or that somehow I've heard reports that their hair is somehow ultra reflective or something and can appear green through whatever process that it reflects light.
There's also this legend about the hide behind too, which fits in nicely with your wife talking about the people telling her, don't look behind you on Toad Road.
Right. That was the other thing that for me, that kind of made the story for me. That connected it full circle. So I find this story from Pennsylvania folklore, the hide behind, which is the creature they said would stalk behind people in the woods. And they said you should never be the last in line because they would always grab the people last in line. If you were going to be the last in line, the bravest people should be the last in line because they could be relied on not to look behind them. I guess the idea is when you look behind, if you saw the hide behind, you get so afraid that you'd freeze up, and that's when he gets you.
Which kind of fits into a lot of like, Paulides' stuff about people being the last in line. Getting taken, nobody knows what happens to them.
Yeah, and in fact, I found there's a very recent missing persons in the 2000s. I forget the actual date, 2014 maybe. It's in the book, the actual date, but a woman right near there went missing. She still hasn't been found.
Really?
And she just disappeared. So she was dropped off near there to see her. She wanted to see her old family home or something, and so dropped off on a nearby road for a walk, and she is gone.
Wow. Were you writing the book when that happened?
I found that as I was writing the book. And again, I don't name her because like what Paulides does, he does it in a very sort of respectful way where he won't say what he thinks, is taking people.
Right. Sarai and I were talking about this last night. Yeah.
Since I'm sort of basically saying, okay, here's all this weird stuff going on out there. There's all this weird cryptid stuff. And then this lady disappears. I didn't want to like name her by name and then have her family have to, this guy's saying Bigfoot took my mom or whatever it is. So I don't name her, but it's a real case. I found another case of a guy who was found dead in the 20s, I believe, 20s or early 30s out there. He had discharged his shotgun twice and was just found dead. They don't know like what happened. And another story of a guy who supposedly fell out of his tree stand, and they found him dead out there. That's a more recent one as well.
Well, going back a little bit to about the wild men in Pennsylvania, during all that research that you did for that book, did you find anything that was close to that area that was reported back in the 19th century?
Yeah. There's one report from the Accomack, which is right nearby. That's supposed to be a haunted inn, actually, but it's right nearby Toad Road, and there's a wild man report from there that I believe it chased a young girl.
Fascinating. There also someone did have a ghost experience out there, or what we think might be a ghost.
Yes, a something experience.
Yeah. This is weird. I want you to tell this one.
The guy sitting on the gate.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah, this is when I was writing the book, I wanted to ask people who were my age or older for stories because the internet is full of Toad Road stories. If you want to find people who say there's 7 gates back there, you can find those stories on the internet. Now, I've been back there multiple times. There's not 7 gates back there. There's 1 gate on one end of the road. There are not 7 gates. Yeah. There never were 7 gates back there. But all over the internet, you will find stories of kids who say, oh, yeah, I went back and I only made it to the 5th gate. It's so scary. And when you call people on this, I say, well, there's only 1 gate. Come on, let's show me these other gates. Well, no, the fallen trees act as gates. Well, there's a fallen tree about every 10 feet across the road.
Yeah.
Back there.
Yeah.
So,
and when you say road, I mean, it's pretty grown over at this point. Like it's almost been totally reclaimed by nature.
Yeah. There's places where it's less than a path. I mean, that's the other thing. People say, "Oh, I've walked the whole road at night." No, you haven't. I guarantee. I guarantee they haven't.
Such a killjoy, Tim. You just
it gets treacherous during the day, and I get lost on the regular back there.
Right.
In broad daylight. which, by the way, this is private property. Please don't go back there. Please don't bug the people back there.
Yeah.
I have permission to be back there, but you're not going to find 7 gates back there. There's just, please leave these poor people alone. You'll find more no trespassing signs in that area than anywhere on earth, I think, just because these poor people are completely harassed.
It's like these damn kids always coming on my property.
Oh yeah. And I think the concern is more that people are going to hurt themselves, which, like I said, it's pretty treacherous back there. There's the stream crossings. If the water's high, the road runs right next to a Cador's Creek, which really at this point is just about a river. It's right near where Cador's feeds into the Susquehanna River. And when Cador's Creek is high and the other creeks back there are high, it's actually it can be a treacherous hike back there.
I guess on my way when I was on US 30, I guess I crossed pretty close to there, didn't I?
Yeah,
Okay.
Not too far. It would have been just north of there. Yeah,
gotcha.
And there was a time where I was thinking about taking people out. Like for my podcast, people were like, "Oh, I want to go." And I was like, "Yeah, I'll take you out there. I'll be like a tour guide." And then I thought about it. I'm like, you know what? I can't. Like, if somebody hurts themselves out there, I can't take that on.
Yeah.
But yeah. So it. My feeling is that it was a sort of hotbed. Well, and it's not just my feeling. Stan Gordon, right around, I think a couple of months before my book was published, Stan Gordon had taken a report, and I didn't know about this, of a hyena-like dogman creature right out in that area. There's been a Mothman creature type report within half mile of Toad Road. So there's these weird like cryptid reports that people are taking from the area since my book came out and before as well.
Well, the guy that was sitting at the gate, what did these people describe that they saw?
Oh, yes, got off track. Sorry about that.
Yeah, you're good. Yeah, we're good.
So I'm asking the older people. The reason why I wanted stories. I wanted pre-internet stories because the stories post-internet are tainted by this burning insane asylum nonsense. So I'm asking everyone I know. This fellow was a lady my wife works with. It was her husband. So he got any stories about Toad Road? Oh, yeah, I got a story. So he tells me the story. He and his friends go out one night. He said that, usually they'd be drinking, but they had no drinks. And they go out there. They just wanted, a thrill. He was, I don't know, early 20s, I think. His age, not the date. This would have been back in the 80s. And he said they came around the corner, and there's this guy just dressed all in white. And he said he had like a pale white flat top and just like pale white skin and a white suit. And he's sitting on, at the time there was a chain link or just a cable stretched between two posts. There wasn't a gate out there at that point. And to close off the road. And he was sitting on this barrier as they drove by, and they said he didn't flinch. As the car lights hit him, he didn't look, he didn't flinch, he didn't move. And they go by him, and he just sits there staring straight ahead the entire time.
It's so weird.
Yeah. And so he's telling me the story, and people get very particular about their sightings. And I wanted to do an illustration of that for the book. And I didn't show it to him before the book was published, basically because I didn't feel like doing the illustration over again. I didn't want him to go, "That's not right," which is what you get a lot of times from people, because they want to really represent what they saw. They don't want, they want, if there's a drawing or something, they really want it to be accurate to what they saw. So I was very hesitant to show him this illustration because like I said, I just didn't want to do it twice. So I did it. I liked it. I threw it in the book. I was like, well, and I kind of crossed my fingers when I gave him his copy. I'm like, oh boy, I can't wait to hear that's not right. He came back to me. He's like, that's it. I don't know how you got it. That's exactly what he looked like. So apparently I did a good job on the illustration in the book.
Had anybody else seen that guy before? Just that one time?
No, that's the only report. And I sent him a picture of the only thing he said I made the hair on the guy a little too high and spiky.
Uh-huh.
He said everything else is just perfect. So I sent him a picture of Dr. Belknap. I had a photo of Dr. Belknap. I said, could it have been this guy that you saw? Dr. Belknap would have been dead at this point. He died in, I think, 78 or 79. And this was, like I said, in the 80s, probably in the late 80s when they had this experience. And I just wanted to, I was just, kind of checking, like, could it have been Dr. Belknap's ghost? And he said, I can't say for sure. He's like, maybe, but he wasn't sure.
That is such a weird story.
Yeah, that was an odd one.
Yeah, I have a friend of mine who's actually been on this show. He tells a story about being at the Area 51 and the environs of it. And he said that he saw some guy at like standing next to a car in like full wizard gear with like a staff and like drove by this person and then went back to look like just a few minutes later and there was nobody there. It just reminded me of that. That story reminds me of that.
Yeah, I love that. Just those little weird details like that.
Yeah.
And there's no, like, this conformed neither to my cryptid thing back there, nor the insane asylum story. It was just another weird story that someone had from the area. That's another reason I really liked it. And
you got a picture of something.
Yes, I got a picture of something. I don't know what it is. I didn't see it when I took the picture. I took, I don't know, 100 pictures. That was the first day I'd been back there. I've been back there several times since, including to the area where I shot this picture. And I took other pictures and if this was a log or something, it wasn't there when I came back. That's all I can say. But it's not going to convince anybody anything. It's not going to. If you're a skeptic, you will look at it and go, "Yeah, well, there's nothing." If you want to believe it's something, you will look at it and say, "Wow, you really got something there." To me, that's the nature of all this stuff. It's the nature of this phenomenon that when you get a picture, it's probably going to be inconclusive. And that's what I seem to have gotten. One guy told me he thinks it's something phasing in to from another dimension. So I don't know. I don't make any claims as to what it is. It's something. It was an interesting photo.
Yeah, you're not sure if it's actually something there or it could just be some kind of pareidolia.
Yeah,
or something
exactly.
like that. Right. It does look like it has teeth, though. I mean, it's.
The thing that really got me is when Stan Gordon told me after the fact about that Dogman kind of like I said, it was a hyena. They reported like a hyena-like Dogman kind of creature.
Weird.
I'm looking at it and I'm like, okay, I could make it into that.
Have you ever felt just like, going to that place as many times as you've been? Have you ever felt just weird presence there, just like just a strange feeling?
Well, the weirdest sort of sequence of events I had, and I have had other things. I went there one time to interview another Bigfoot researcher, and I was interviewing him, and his girlfriend called us over after we were done the interview, and she said, "Look at that." First of all, she said, I heard a growl from across the creek. I walked down to where she was, and I'm looking across the creek, and there's these white sycamore trees that kind of stand out from the rest of the trees. There's a single sycamore tree, just a great big sycamore tree, rocking back and forth, like back and forth, back and forth. You can just see the top of it, like going back and forth and back and forth. No wind that day. And I'm looking at him, and I'm going, what the heck is that? So there was that, but I wasn't particularly creeped out by that. The sort of weirdest sequence of events that happened to me. I was there last spring, and I was there with a friend, and we were hiking. I actually found a new way into it. This road leads to Cador's Furnace, which is an old Revolutionary War iron furnace, and I found a different way in. That was really, you could see the oldest part of the road that goes back to Revolutionary War times, actually pre-Revolutionary War times. And it's really cut into the hillside. You can see the old stonework. It's really, really neat. And I'm really excited. So I'm following this in, and at some point, we were done our hike that day, and we kind of agreed, well, we'll come back in 2 weeks. As I'm walking out, I look down in the middle of the path, and there's this like perfectly clean raccoon skull. I collect skulls, so for me, it's like, oh wow, look at that, bingo, like hurrah. So I pick up the raccoon skull and put it in my pack, and I don't think anything of it. And so we make a date to come back in 2 weeks or whatever it was. I think it was either 2 or 3 weeks. So that day comes, and I call him and like, hey, let's go. I want to go back out there. And he says, well, I can't do it. So I decide I'm going to go out by myself. So I hike in, and it's again a pretty treacherous. People have been dumping glass in this one area, and you kind of have to tiptoe over this sort of field of sharp glass to get into it. I'm a little, I've got MS, so I do fall down in the woods occasionally. Yeah, I'm a little trepidatious about that, but I make my way past that and get onto the old road, and I catch movement up ahead, and I have to be careful the way I explain this because it sounds like I'm saying I see a moose, but I didn't see a moose. The first thought that came to my head, the first thought was, oh, look, a deer. And of course, then it was like, well, no way, that's way too big to be a deer. And then I'm thinking like, well what is that? What am I looking at? It was gray and black. And the thought that came to my head was moose. And the reason why I say that is I've seen moose in the wild in the woods in Massachusetts. And it was shocking how big they were. I guess having not seen one in person before, and growing up on a farm, you think, their moose are like, big cows or a horse maybe size, but they're much bigger. They're startlingly big, when you see them in the wild, especially. And they move different than a horse. So that was sort of the feeling when I saw whatever this was. I went moose. What? Is it a moose? And then of course, this was all happening in a matter of seconds. I saw this thing for, under 5 seconds probably. It just shot off super fast into the woods. South, the same way I was going on the trail.
Weird. And as far as I know, there's no moose in Pennsylvania, right?
There are no moose.
Yeah.
There were black moose back in the day. There are no elk here anymore. Not in York County anyway. In other parts of Pennsylvania, there are. It was quadrupedal, but its shoulders were higher than its rear end. So it's not like the back was parallel to the ground. I was seeing, I could see the shoulders, and it looked like the front end was powering the back end. I don't want to say, I saw a squatch, but it looked like when a gorilla runs on all fours.
Huh.
But like I said, I had this weird, because I think you try to make things into anything normal first. Like I said, at first I'm going like, well, deer. And like, no, way too big to be a deer. Then I'm going, well, moose. It's a moose. And then, then you realize that couldn't have been a moose.
Yeah,
and by
you try
that
to
point,
rationalize it. Yeah.
Yeah. By that point, it's gone. So it shot like quick as a wink. I mean, it just faster than anything else I've ever seen move in the woods. And not through bravery. I literally just wasn't thinking. I followed after it. And the trail gets nasty down in there. Like I said, it's in a sort of a river bottom. It's a creek bottom. But when it starts getting warm, thorns and stinging nettle grow up. And I saw a copperhead that day. By the time I was done, I was covered in ticks.
Yeah.
It's just a nasty trail. It's not a pleasant hiking trail. People aren't supposed to be on it, and no one would hike it for fun anyway.
Right.
Especially that time of year. So I follow this thing on probably, I go the direction it went for probably a half mile. I don't see anything else. I didn't feel particularly creeped out. And I come upon, now this wasn't there 2 weeks earlier. I'd been on this trail in this place 2 weeks earlier, at eye level in the middle of the trail is a deer skull, perfectly clean and impaled on a branch.
That's weird.
That stopped me in my tracks. And now I collect skulls. So to me, like, somebody said, oh, was that a warning? Do you think that was a warning? Like, not to me. To me, it was almost more like, oh, you like that raccoon skull, did you? Well, here's one for you. That's kind of what I took from it.
Huh.
I wasn't, I gathered this thing up. I took the skull home with me because, to me, that was left there for me. I did turn around at the skull. I didn't go further, but not because I was intimidated. I was just so weirded out, and like the whole thing was just so odd. And I'm looking around, I'm trying to figure out how this skull got there. And could a person have put it there? Absolutely. But that means they had to have, in the 2 weeks since I was there, either bring a clean deer skull or find a deer skull in the woods, bring it down and impale it on a branch in the middle of the trail, and you get to this like why and how kind of thing. Again, it's a really nasty trail. Nobody's hiking it for fun at that point. So I take it home, and when it's not till I get home that I sit down and I think, what were you doing? Like, if something was trying to lead you, you took the bait, Yeah. I mean, I took the bait and just went without even thinking it. And again, it wasn't bravery. I've had other weird stuff in the woods, which has frozen me, stiff, which probably shouldn't have. I was so scared, I couldn't move.
Yeah, you don't think about it at the time.
Yeah, there was no logical thought going into it. I just was like, oh, I'm going that way. And I followed that thing for a half mile. It's, easily could have set up any kind of ambush it wanted if that's what it had in mind.
You could have been the next victim, Tim.
Yeah, sure. I could. Yeah, I could be. As my daughter says, she uses it as a verb. I could have been missing 411.
Yep. You also talk about in the book a lot of UFO sightings and also like black dogs and werewolves, which I guess could be Dogman. Let's talk about that a little bit too.
Yeah. So the second half of the book, the first half of the book, kind of tells the Toad Road story and corrects the urban legends and so forth. And for the second half of the book, I said, well, I found so much weird stuff on Toad Road. Let me just look all around the area for other weird stuff, and let me start collecting other weird stories. So then I just kind of went in the surrounding counties and picked up everything I could. I didn't do too many ghost stories because there's already, I don't know. I mean, you were at Gettysburg. There's like 9,000 ghost books already for the area. So that gets pretty redundant. So I try to do stuff other than ghosts. And I found, like you said, black dog reports, sort of werewolf and dogman reports, you name it. So, like, where do you want to go?
I'm really personally interested in the dogman stuff. I grew up in Michigan, so like that whole mythos in like Michigan and Wisconsin is really huge. But I've never heard of it much elsewhere, like in the Northeast or whatever. Well,
Pennsylvania's supposedly really hot with the dogman right now. I will say this: there's one report that now I found it wasn't I didn't take the report originally. I found it someone else reported. So I'm reporting someone else's report of this dogman sighting from Macho Forest in Adams County State Forest. I reported in the book, and I was approached by a woman who got the book, and it was indeed her sighting. And she was very angry. She said, I never said that was a dogman sighting. Her mind, I don't think she ever saw the creature, but I said, well, tell me what it was. And what she reports sounds for all the world like a Bigfoot encounter. I forget the particulars of it, but it was had to do with she had the smell, I think, and the screams and so forth, and I think heard wood knocks or something. But at no point did she ever say dogman. So she reported this to another researcher, and they turned it into a dogman sighting. I believe this does happen, especially now. I think dogman is kind of the new hot cryptid.
Yeah,
it's the big scary now, scarier than Bigfoot. So I believe some Bigfoot sightings are getting turned into Dogman sightings because he's meaner and scarier. So it's so that definitely that was one of the Dogman reports in the book, which ended up, like I said, it was not a Dogman after all. One of the stranger ones was a woman I talked to. Now I don't know if this is specifically a Dogman, but she said her neighbor kept telling her she was waking up with things in the room with her. And they were watching one of the Mummy movies, apparently, and there's like Anubis creatures in it. Uh-huh. And she said, this is months and months of this woman telling her she's waking up with dogs in her room. And these Anubis creatures, she's like, no, what's in my room when I wake up? Those are the dogs. So she's waking up with headed men in her room.
What in the world?
Yeah. And this lady gave me all kinds of strange stories from the Seven Valleys area. Really neat stuff. But that was the one that was like, whoa, And she reported, I think, sitting on the porch with her neighbors and hearing something. They said something huge, like coming through the trees, and they kept hearing it coming and coming and coming, but it never broke through the tree line. But that was the same people.
See, waking up with stuff in the room, I mean, that reminds me of, alien abduction stuff and sleep paralysis and
you'll get that. Like I've heard other Dogman reports where people say, will say it was in my house, and like, doors aren't broken down or anything like that. And that's just, I mean, it's so bizarre. I think with Dogman, first of all, even with Bigfoot, I don't think we're talking about a natural sort of ape in the woods kind of creature. There's something very unusual about the way it acts, and the sort of phenomena that surround it. But even more so with Dogman, like these things, I don't think we're talking about like a natural sort of creature that
right. This isn't just some large unknown werewolf.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So maybe that's part of it. Maybe they, however they manifest, they can sometimes just manifest in people's houses.
I mean, I think I would just like run out of the room at that point. Very interesting. The kind of like you talk about that experience, and then the book that that we talked about, having some kind of link to Egyptian stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder what the connection is, if there is a connection to that, if any.
Yeah, well, that's the thing with Egyptian secrets, and there's another powwow book called I want to say Secrets of Gypsy Magic or something. A lot of times they just use this as something exotic. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. They would so Egyptian would have been something exotic in back in the 1800s or something. Right. So if it was Egyptian secrets, it's a woo, So, but it is, it's very odd that there is a connection with that. And in fact, that same woman told me a story. She called me recently. She keeps in regular touch. She's an older woman. I think she's probably in her, late 60s. And she just calls me every now and then with weird stories. Like she'll call me and tell me she told me a story about a guy getting raped by a ghost, a local guy. She just calls me out of nowhere with weird stories. Like every like 3 to 6 months, I'll get a call from her, and she just have this like catalog of weird stories she'll tell me, which I love. I'm fine with that.
Tim, what do you think is? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
But most recently, she called me, and I mean, like last week, she called me and she told me a story of a little girl who started speaking in ancient Egyptian or Coptic, like from her church or something. They, of course, they thought the girl was possessed. She's this like little 6 or 7 year old girl who started speaking just out of nowhere, starts speaking in ancient Egyptian. So there's another connection there.
How did they know it was ancient Egyptian?
I don't know. I assume someone recognized it as that.
Coptic's based in Greek, so maybe someone was trained and knows it maybe a little bit.
Yeah, my thought was maybe the minister might have had some training in ancient languages. I don't know.
What do you think is going on in this area? And the myths about it, the urban legends about the 7 gates is that linked to just the strangeness of this area?
Yeah, but before I started doing the podcast, I was kind of like, I bet I could find the same amount of weird stuff no matter where I lived. It's a matter of digging.
Uh-huh.
But enough people like have told me with the podcast, like, no, Pennsylvania's weird. Like, you got some serious weird stuff going on there. But now I'm like, well, maybe there is something. Maybe there's, and I'm not a geologist, but I'll look at the geology of the place, and there's, there is limestone and quartz, and I don't know. I think people are grasping at straws, honestly, when they start, going to that. Like, they're just looking for some kind of pseudo-scientific answer. But if that does play into it, there is, quartz and limestone. We're on a huge vein of that. I don't know. I can't say, but we have a long history of really weird stuff. And I think it was when I talked to you, you were talking about how, like, somebody mentioned that the Bigfoot reports just get weirder and weirder until you get to Pennsylvania, where they get, the further east you get. Yeah,
the Goblin universe stuff, which you mentioned in the book, the whole Goblin universe concept.
Yeah.
That's the more than what we're dealing with. Like in the Northwest, you could say, well, that could be an unknown primate, but as you get further east, it's just the weirder and weirder it gets. And actually, after we talked to you on that show, Rob and I did a whole thing about just some of the weirder accounts from the east, like the in Jerome Clark's book, which is probably one of my favorite books of all time, where he just lists out. It's under the his hairy bipeds section, which I still think would be an awesome band name, but good punk band name. But, it just gets weirder and weirder. Luke actually has something that he told me that his grandmother told him that I think you would find very interesting.
Yeah, I talked about it on the show.
Long time ago.
Yeah, long time ago, like maybe 2 years ago or something.
More like 4.
Yeah. So my grandma came up here to hang out with my mom because she needed a caretaker.
Where's here?
In Tennessee.
Yeah,
in Nashville. Well, outside of Nashville in her case. But every time I went to go see my mom, I would catch up with my grandma. We have been apart, my entire life. She's been down there in Florida. I grew up here in Tennessee. And she grew up in Florida too, as a young girl. So she was telling me some stories when I was over there hanging out. And one of the stories that she told, her parents used to take them on trips, nature trips, camping and stuff like that to get their kids, my grandma familiar with the wild, survival and stuff like that, because it was an important thing to teach back then. And so they're walking through part of the Everglades in southern Florida, and she said that her mom and her dad encountered two like humanoid apes. I guess she called them skunk apes, which are apparently like some kind of species of red-haired ape that's been spotted or down there or something. I don't know anything about the skunk ape, but she said that that they were just really humanoid looking. The mother was cradling a baby, and she said there was a father figure nearby, and they saw him coming, or actually she said that they kind of ambushed him, like walked up on him, and they were surprised, turned around and just looked him in the face for a second, and then they took off running.
And that was in Florida.
Yeah, in the Everglades.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And didn't your grandmother say that people knew that they were there and they just kind of left them alone?
Well,
like it was just kind of common knowledge or something like that.
Well, that's why I mentioned the whole skunk ape thing, is because I guess they just figured, well, they're just a species of apes down here, nothing out of the ordinary, But when she told me the story, she described them as being like extremely humanoid. Like she said that she looked into their eyes and she could see, you know, an intelligent thought looking back at her, you know.
That sort of they've always been here, leave them alone kind of thing. That seems to be more common in the South.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard other people say that as well.
Yeah.
What do you think about that story?
I mean, it sounds like, so as I'm collecting these Bigfoot stories throughout time, the similarity of the stories has become more interesting to me than the description of the creatures. And when I hear a story that sounds like, you know, 50 other stories I've heard, to me it's now just confirming, like, yeah, of course. And it's not that it's not surprising. It's always surprising. It's always incredible when people see any of these things, but it's just sort of confirming to my thought that people really are seeing something. And so when I hear it, you know, that it's just like, yep, yeah, of course. Yeah. I like, totally. She saw it, you know. It's the old reports that I'm collecting. It's the behavior of the creatures has become far more interesting to me to document than the appearance. I think maybe people could, you know, make up a hairy monster, you know, maybe a Jungian thing, and maybe it's always there. We always have hairy monsters, you know. Any kid might come up with a big hairy monster, but when people start reporting the behavior, and that these same behaviors through, you know, hundreds of years in these reports, the same behavior today, people are reporting that they reported in, you know, the 1840s. That to me is really, really interesting, and that's what I've really get excited about now with these stories. So it's not a super uncommon story, but to me it's I love that because it's just, you know, it's like another one. It's yeah, of course, someone else, you know, another person saw a family, sure.
And as you and Joshua Cutchin were talking about on one of your latest episodes of Strange Familiars, that you guys were talking about like some of the similarities between the fairy lore too, and that's a very common thing as well. Oh yeah. There's so many similarities, you know, across the board that with all this stuff that it's irresponsible not to note them. Well, I wanted to ask you before, you know, we end this part. I wanted to ask you about this documentary that's on Netflix called Discovering Bigfoot.
Okay. Don't make me walk that tightrope, buddy.
Todd Standing. And I'd seen like Ren and a couple other people, you guys posted about this on the Where to the Road Go Slack. And I watched it. I finally was able to get through it. And I mean, this guy is extremely enthusiastic.
He's,
to say the least.
Yeah. He's not a great spokesman or editor. You know what I mean? Like he should have an editor, and then he should maybe have another voiceover guy, because his personality is right up there. It's right up front there. You know? Yeah. He was very much like a man paints himself as very much a man of the wilderness in his ghillie suit. And he's got Dr. Meldrum and what's it, Vindernagel is the other guy? Vindernagel, yeah.
Who I think just passed away recently.
He did, yeah.
But
rest in peace.
But but these guys, you know, they take it pretty seriously. And so does Todd Standing in his own way, I guess. But you had some, like, I think you had told me that there's some problems with his evidence.
Yeah, and
putting it lightly.
So there's some people and some people I respect who have come out, you know, and said they think his stuff is legit.
Yeah.
There are other people who have pointed out some real problems with him. You know, I'm not a video expert. I'm not a primate, you know, anatomy expert. My gut feeling is when I look at what people jokingly call his Muppet, which, I mean, it does look like, it looks felt. It really looks like a Muppet. besides the way it looks, and the other, even the sort of creepy black face he has at the end. These are human face proportions, and that's what concerns me. A lot of the creature reports I've seen, they will talk about the space, for instance, between the nose and the upper lip being double that of human size. The nostrils being, much wider than human nostrils. The eyes being much, much bigger than human eyes. So when you look at these and they have human proportions, it's like, well, to me, that's like warning bells start going off. Now, of course, there are people who report that they just look like hairy people. They look exactly like a person. He was just hairy. So, I'm trying to be nice, and I'm trying not to anger any of my friends who stand behind his evidence. But for me, my gut feeling is he's another one of these researchers who probably did get some legitimate stuff and felt the pressure to keep producing, and he has some legitimate stuff mixed with some not. But I think if you ask Ren, I think Ren feels that it's all bunk. Yeah. And other people feel it's all legit. I don't know. And I go into these things more ready to believe, I think, than other people. Like I didn't. Ren pointed out how convenient it was that the camera turned away before the thing grabbed the apple. I didn't have such a problem with that. But when he points it out, I go, okay, yeah, I see. I guess there is that, but you do see something grab an apple. I mean, that there is something there. The one picture he has of the whatever it was below a tree right in the beginning, that was very interesting to me. Whatever it is that runs up the hill seems to run up pretty agile, pretty quickly, and without much problem. But I don't know. I can't.
Yeah, that was interesting. That was.
Yeah. But the Muppet footage and the blackface that to me is like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's kind of very similar to Stan Romanek and his stuff with the aliens.
So I still haven't watched
why
that
do
yet.
these? Yeah, it's like why do they have to do this? Why?
Well, again, I think that's another part of this phenomenon. It happens so often where, and I'm not saying Todd is or isn't,
sure.
And that he has or hasn't faked anything, but it's been proved like so often in the past, these respected researchers, these respected Bigfoot guys will end up being tied to some kind of hoax or if not a hoax, some kind of really shady thing where they're leading people off into the woods for money and not delivering and keeping people's money. There was a researcher down in Texas that got into a bunch of trouble because he was booking Bigfoot tours for people and it ended up keeping a bunch of people's money and not delivering on the tours and stuff. So there's this weird like hoaxy shady aspect that comes into all this that like might be a part of it. I mean, I think Jeff Ritzman has talked about that in the past too, that this weird, like kind of skeevy hoaxy thing kind of like works its way into the whole phenomenon.
Mm-hmm. Any of this stuff, whether it be the UFOs, alien stuff, Bigfoot.
Yeah. And it's really weird. And like, it
muddies the water.
It's probably my biggest concern being involved in this is like, one day, am I going to be turned like to the dark side? Am I going to be, I'll be out in the woods with like holding a fucking Muppet or excuse my language. Like,
I'm marked.
Rob's going to get his little book out. Don't worry about it. Oh man. Well, Tim, tell people where they can get the book, and also please tell everybody about your podcast, Strange Familiars, which is becoming one of my favorites to listen to now.
The books are available either directly from me, and you can find my information at strangefamiliars.com, or you can just, if you look up Timothy Renner, I should pop up at any number of places online. The books are also available at Amazon. And I'm perfectly okay if people want to get them off of Amazon. Their split for independent authors is very fair. But if you want to get them from me, I can do signed copies. I can do personalized. I can put little Bigfoot sketches in them, whatever you want. Either way, that's good. My podcast is Strange Familiars. It's at strangefamiliars.com or wherever you listen to podcasts. And we do the paranormal thing. We do a combination of interviews and folklore and try to get on site wherever we can. We do a lot of on-site recordings. And we try to make the experience part of the story and make the story tell stories through experience as well, whether it's witness interviews or like I said, us getting out on location.
Yeah, it's very good. I highly recommend it. Well, thank you, Tim, for being on. It's been excellent to go beyond the seventh gate with you. So
awesome. Thanks for having me. Anytime.
All right, stay on the line for us. We're going to close this section out. And guys, we'll be back on Conspirinormal.
So no one's made it to the seventh gate of hell.
No one's made it to the seventh gate
I
of
googled
hell.
it, and like even in the urban legend, like nobody makes it past the fifth gate. It's like,
Nah.
well, how do you know? How do you know there's seven?
I don't think you can make it past the fifth gate.
And why are they trying to get to hell?
Or maybe the ninth
I
gate.
think there's easier ways to get to hell.
That's the thing with that's what I said, man. I was like, what? Why would you want to like go to the hell? Like, what's? Well, maybe Luke would. He probably thinks it's metal, but
Hell's probably pretty brutal.
it's pretty brutal in hell,
I want to
dude.
visit, but I don't want to get stuck for eternity.
Well, that's where you're bound anyway, right?
Oh yeah.
If you listen to metal, that's what happens, dude. So, Rob, you're the crypto guy of this group. What did you think of that?
Well, it was a little less crypto than most of the stuff we've done with Timothy, but
Yeah.
still interesting stuff. Like, I love the whole like I said, the seven legend stuff. And there's different legends surrounding that particular legend, which I was reading during the break, which are pretty cool. We got into the Dogman stuff, which I told Tim that's always fascinated me, because that's kind of it's mostly, you hear a lot of that stuff around Michigan and Wisconsin. I never heard that associated with the Northeast, but apparently it's gaining a lot of steam up there.
Yeah.
He seems to think that it's just popular because it's popular.
Yeah, it's become kind of a nationwide thing now.
Really?
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting because, like the Wisconsin thing, I think you're thinking about Linda Godfrey and her book, The Beast of Bray Road,
Right.
which she was talking about that maybe 10, 15 years ago now. I think that book was written sometime in the middle of 2000s. And then it's kind of spread all over the country. I don't know. I think it's kind of urban legendary itself in a way.
Sure. And
It could have that same effect as like Slender Man, where people hear about it and then start seeing it.
Well, and like
You
Tim
know?
said, it's just kind of it's like a step up. It's like the scarier version of Bigfoot. It's, of course, that would be popular, but
Right. And speaking of Slender Man, Nick Redfern has a book coming out about Slender Man,
really,
which we're going to have to get him on about.
Absolutely.
It's going to be interesting.
what hasn't he written about?
I don't know.
There can't be much left.
I don't. Has he done a cookbook? He might have done a cookbook or something. It's possible, I guess.
Hey, if you're a stoner, you could come up with some pretty good cooking ideas.
I'm sure you can.
Yeah.
Tell us one of your cooking ideas. What did you come up with one time, Luke?
Oh man.
Oh, dude.
Well, like, my style of cooking is like bachelor cooking. So basically,
you get your Easy Bake oven and
McQueasy Bake, man. I'm a
Queasy
guy,
Bake.
okay? Easy Bakes for girls. All right? But like you open the fridge door and you see what you have available to you, and then start thinking about the flavor combinations that you can make from what you have.
Sure, I've been there.
Yeah.
So it's like mayonnaise on a tortilla. Maybe-
yum.
And you got some spices left, right? You got some cayenne, or you got some turmeric or some random shit in your cabinet, Just start throwing it together, man. See what happens. Pickles and cheese sandwich.
It gets pretty interesting over there at Luke's house.
You never know.
Did you enjoy your Brogel and your Imperium?
Man, I'm 6 Brogels and 1 Imperium in.
So what are you going to get from Taco Bell that doesn't have cheese? That's my question.
Well, the beauty of Taco Bell and something that they don't.
We're not an advertiser for Taco Bell.
Taco Rella. Well, they don't explain things well. Their menu sucks. Like they don't tell people what they have and what they don't have and what options you can get. I guess they want you to download the app, right? But everything is customizable. So you get your favorite menu item. You don't get it fresco because it's going to cost a lot more, and all you get is tomatoes. Like they take things away.
But he's really thought about this. Like really has put in a lot of
That's
thought
why I
about
asked.
this.
I knew that he was the expert.
You order something fresco, which is like the dietary thing to do, and they add tomatoes. They take things away and then charge you like twice as much. So all you have to do is just say like, I want a shredded chicken burrito, but minus this, and this, to take off the cheese and the sauce if you want to cut that too. And then it's a lot cheaper, and it's dietary too. Well, not to the extreme or anything. But
And the person at the counter just like rolls their eyes at you the whole time. Like,
well, I've seen a lot of fat people working at Taco Bell too. So who's the thin one? Who's the thin, sexy one? Okay,
obviously you, Luke.
That's right.
Well, this discussion got completely derailed. But that's
always-
why we
it
love
always
you,
will.
Luke. That's why we love having you
It
here.
always will, man.
For sure.
But the beauty in life is that things like Taco Bell can be symbolic for a lot of different things happening in your life, man. It's multi-dimensional, it's multi-level.
That's right. Taco Bell is just a metaphor.
Oh, yeah. Well, the multi-dimensional. There you go. That fits right in with Conspirinormal.
See?
For sure. Well, we just did a Patreon episode with Tim, and I think we missed a Patreon for January, but we're going to have one definitely for February. We talked about Bigfoot, our Bigfoot the Nephilim, and I think the answer was no. But if you want more detail, you can go to Patreon. And PSA time, Rob, tell everybody where they can find our Patreon.
Alrighty.
In the arms of
For less than
an
a cup of a
angel,
coffee a day,
fly away
you can support your favorite
from
podcast
here.
too.
In the
For less than what you would normally spend on gas for one trip to the grocery store, you can help us bring on better guests. Help us grow the show. At patreon.com/Conspirinormal, you can do all these things and more. There's various tiers. We have bonus episodes, t-shirts, wallpapers.
Give us your money.
And if you don't want to do that, you can do a one-time donation at our website, Conspirinormal.com. Thank you. I'm Sarah McLaughlin.
Sarah McRoblin. Thank you. All right. That was beautiful. I'm absolutely overcome.
Yeah, me too, dude. Emotion just washed
I know.
over me.
I got a tear.
I got tears in my eyes. We should have like a little mascot of like a cat in a cage. Looking all
Those poor
sad.
animals.
Oh man,
There goes all your sensitive folk.
it just reminds me of so much. Okay, well, thank you guys for listening to Conspirinormal. 200th episode is coming up, and we've got that all planned and hoping to have a good time. We got a good little panel, and we'll have Luke with us too.
Drunk Luke.
Drunk Luke. Maybe he'll sing some more for you on that one.
Oh, there'll definitely be some kind of karaoke tacked on the end.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, we got to do that for sure. All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening to Conspirinormal, and we will be back next time on Conspirinormal.